The gunshot that killed Gabriel Turner's husband echoed through the dusty streets of Moab, Utah on a scorching August afternoon in 1868, and with it died any hope she had of keeping her son. She stood in the doorway of their ramshackle cabin at the edge of town, her calico dress torn at the hem, watching as two men dragged Thomas Turner's body away like it was nothing more than a sack of grain. The mine foreman didn't even look back as he shouted over his shoulder that the company wouldn't be paying out any death benefits to the widow of a man who'd been caught stealing copper. Gabrielle pressed her palm against the rough wooden doorframe to steady herself, her other hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. She was 5 months pregnant with their second child, and her 3-year-old son Nathan clung to her skirts, his small fingers twisted in the fabric. The boy had his father's dark hair and serious gray eyes, and he watched the men disappear around the corner with an expression far too knowing for someone so young. "Mama." His voice was small and frightened. She couldn't answer him. The words stuck in her throat like stones. Thomas hadn't been stealing. She knew that with every fiber of her being. But knowing the truth and proving it were two different things entirely, and in a mining town where the company owned everything from the general store to the sheriff's badge, the truth was whatever they said it was. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of desperation. Gabriel sold everything they owned: the iron cookstove, Thomas's tools, even her wedding ring, but it wasn't enough. The landlord wanted his rent, the grocer wanted payment for the credit he'd extended, and the doctor who'd set Nathan's broken arm last spring wanted his fee. The debts piled up like snow in a blizzard, and Gabrielle could feel herself being buried alive under the weight of them. She took in laundry until her hands were raw and bleeding. She worked at the boarding house scrubbing floors until her back screamed in agony and the baby kicked in protest. But no matter how hard she worked, she couldn't earn enough to feed herself and Nathan both. She watched her son grow thinner by the day, his cheeks hollowing out, his eyes growing larger in his small face. When he stopped asking for second helpings at supper, when he started giving her half his biscuit without being asked, something inside her shattered. The preacher's wife came calling on a Tuesday morning in September. Mrs. Harriet Blackwell was a stern-faced woman with iron gray hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch her skin. She sat in Gabriel's only remaining chair and folded her hands in her lap. "I'll speak plainly, Mrs. Turner," she said, her voice as dry as the desert wind. "You're destitute. That boy needs proper care and you can't provide it. I know a family in Denver, good Christian people who have been looking to adopt a child. They'd give him everything you can't: education, opportunity, a future." Gabriel's hands shook as she poured weak tea into chipped cups. "He has a mother who can barely feed herself." Mrs. Blackwell's eyes dropped pointedly to Gabriel's protruding belly. "And soon you'll have another mouth you can't fill. Be sensible. They're offering $300. That's enough to see you through your confinement and get you back on your feet. $300. It might as well have been 3,000. It was more money than Gabrielle had ever seen at one time, enough to pay off every debt, enough to buy food and firewood for the winter, enough to give her unborn child a chance at survival. "I need to think about it," Gabrielle whispered. Mrs. Blackwell stood, brushing imaginary dust from her black skirts. "The family's leaving Denver in 2 weeks. After that, the offer expires. I'll be back Friday for your answer." That night, Gabrielle lay awake listening to Nathan's soft breathing from his pallet on the floor. She tried to imagine handing him over to strangers, watching him disappear down the road, never knowing if he was happy or scared or if he remembered her at all. The thought made her physically ill. But then she imagined him starving, wasting away while she stood helpless, unable to provide even the most basic necessities. She imagined the new baby being born into such poverty that neither of them survived it. By Friday morning, Gabriel had cried herself empty. She had no tears left when Mrs. Blackwell returned with a stern-faced man in a black suit who carried an official-looking document and a leather purse heavy with coins. Nathan sensed something was wrong. He wrapped his arms around Gabriel's legs and wouldn't let go, even when she tried to peel his fingers away gently. "Nathan, sweetheart, you're going on an adventure," Gabriel said, her voice breaking despite her efforts to keep it steady. "These nice people are going to take you somewhere wonderful. I want to stay with you, Mama." His gray eyes filled with tears. She knelt down despite the awkwardness of her pregnant belly, cupping his small face in her work-roughened hands. "I know, baby, I know, but Mama needs you to be brave for me. Can you do that?" "I don't want to be brave, I want you." The man in the black suit cleared his throat impatiently. Gabriel looked up at him, at his cold eyes and thin lips, and something in her rebelled violently. She started to shake her head, started to say she'd changed her mind, but then Nathan's stomach growled audibly in the silence, and the decision was made for her. "You're going to have so many adventures," she whispered against Nathan's hair, breathing in the little boy smell of him one last time. "And someday, when you're all grown up and successful, maybe you'll come back and find me. Can you remember that? Can you remember your mama's name and this town?" "Gabriel Turner," Nathan said dutifully. "Moab, Utah. That's my smart boy." She kissed his forehead, his cheeks, his nose. "I love you more than all the stars in the sky. Don't you ever forget that." The man pried Nathan's hands from Gabriel's dress with more force than necessary. Nathan screamed for her, his cries echoing off the canyon walls that surrounded the town. Gabriel stood frozen in the doorway, watching the wagon carry her son away, her arms wrapped around her middle as if she could hold herself together through sheer will. The $300 sat on the table like blood money. Gabriel stared at it for hours before she finally picked it up and walked to the general store to pay her debts. The coins felt like they burned her fingers. 3 months later, in the depths of a harsh December, Gabriel gave birth to a daughter she named Hope. The irony of the name wasn't lost on her. She had no hope left, but she gave the word to her daughter anyway, like a gift she couldn't use herself. The years that followed were hard but survivable. Gabriel worked every job she could find, keeping her head down and her mouth shut. She cleaned houses for the mine owners' wives, took in sewing, and eventually secured a position cooking at the boarding house. Hope grew up strong and willful, with her father's dark hair and her mother's green eyes. Gabriel never told her about Nathan. The words wouldn't come. How did you explain to a child that you'd sold her brother like livestock? Gabriel dreamed about Nathan every night. In her dreams, he was always 3 years old, always crying for her, always just out of reach. She woke gasping and sweating, her heart pounding, guilt sitting on her chest like a physical weight. 15 years passed. Hope turned 15, tall and beautiful and restless, eager to escape the dusty confines of Moab. Gabriel was 38 years old, her hair streaked with premature gray, her hands permanently stained from years of hard labor. She'd saved every spare penny, keeping the money hidden in a tin box under her floorboards. Someday, she told herself. Someday she'd have enough to go to Denver and find Nathan. Someday she'd be able to explain. But in 1883, the mine that had dominated Moab for decades started to fail. The copper deposits that had drawn prospectors and workers by the hundreds began to play out. Families packed up and left for better opportunities elsewhere. The boarding house closed. Gabriel lost her job. She tried to find other work, but there were too many people chasing too few positions. The money in her tin box dwindled. Hope took a job at the general store, but it paid next to nothing. Gabriel watched her daughter grow thinner, watched the light fade from her eyes, and felt history repeating itself like a curse. Then Gabriel got sick. It started as a persistent cough that rattled in her chest. Within weeks, she was too weak to stand for more than a few minutes at a time. The doctor, a young man fresh from medical school back east who'd come west seeking adventure, examined her with gentle hands and a grave expression. "Consumption," he said quietly. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Turner. With rest and good food you might recover, but without treatment," he didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew what consumption meant for someone without money for medicine or sanatoriums. It was a death sentence delivered slowly, coughed up in pieces. Hope refused to accept it. "There has to be something we can do," she insisted, her eyes wild with fear. "Some treatment, somewhere. There's a sanatorium in Colorado Springs," the doctor said. "They've had some success with fresh air therapy and a new treatment regimen. But it's expensive, and the journey alone, how much?" Gabriel asked, even though she knew the answer would be impossible. $800 at least, maybe more. They had $43 in the tin box. Gabriel's condition deteriorated rapidly. By October, she could barely leave her bed. Hope took care of her with fierce determination, spooning broth between her mother's lips, washing her wasted body with tender care, sitting beside her through long nights when the coughing fits were so bad Gabriel thought she might shake apart. "Mama, you have to fight," Hope whispered one night, gripping Gabriel's hand. "You can't leave me. You're all I have." Gabriel wanted to tell her daughter the truth, wanted to confess that once, long ago, Hope had had a brother, but the words remained locked behind her teeth. What good would the truth do now? Nathan was gone, lost to her forever. Even if Hope somehow found him, what could he do? He'd been 3 years old when she sold him. He probably didn't even remember her. The town's new sheriff came calling on a cold November morning. Nathaniel Winters was a stranger to Moab, having arrived just 3 months earlier to take over after the previous sheriff had left for California. He was a tall man in his early 20s with serious gray eyes and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. There was something about him that made Gabriel's heart clench painfully in her chest, but she couldn't place why. Hope answered the door, her expression wary. The law in Moab had never been friendly to the Turner family. "I'm looking for Gabriel Turner," Sheriff Winters said. His voice was deep and steady. "My mother's ill. Whatever you want. I'm not here to cause trouble, miss. I heard she was sick, and I wanted to see if there was anything I could do to help." Hope's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Why would you help us?" Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "Because it's the right thing to do. May I see her?" Gabriel heard the exchange from her bed and called out weakly, "Let him in, Hope." The sheriff ducked through the low doorway and removed his hat. Up close, Gabriel could see the lines of care on his young face, the shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. He pulled a chair close to her bedside and sat down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Mrs. Turner, I'm Sheriff Nathaniel Winters. I've been reviewing old case files since I took this position, and I came across your husband's death report from 1868. Gabriel's breath caught. "That was 15 years ago. I know, but something about it didn't sit right with me. The company records show Thomas Turner died in a cave-in, but the sheriff's report says he was shot for stealing. Those are two very different stories." "Thomas didn't steal anything," Gabriel said, and even after all these years the words came out fierce and strong. "They murdered him because he was organizing the workers to demand safer conditions. They called him a thief to avoid paying me his wages." Nathaniel nodded slowly. "That's what I suspected. I've been asking questions, talking to old-timers who were there." I found 3 men willing to testify that your husband was innocent. The mine foreman at the time is long gone, but the company's still here, and they still owe you." Hope gasped. "You mean?" "I mean I can file a wrongful death claim on your mother's behalf. The company will fight it, but with witnesses willing to testify, we have a case. It won't be quick and it won't be easy, but if we win, the settlement could be substantial." Gabriel closed her eyes. Justice, after 15 years. It should have felt like vindication. Instead, it felt like salt in old wounds. "It's too late," she whispered. "I'll be dead before any case makes it through the courts." "Maybe not." Nathaniel's voice was quiet but determined. "I have some money saved. Enough to get you to that sanatorium in Colorado Springs and pay for a few months of treatment. By the time that runs out, we should have a preliminary ruling on the claim. If the company sees we're serious, they might settle out of court." Hope made a choked sound. "Why would you do that for us? You don't even know us." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Because I know what it's like to be helpless. To watch someone you love suffer and not be able to do anything about it. If I can help now, I will." There was something in his eyes, some old pain that Gabriel recognized because she carried the same wound herself. She studied his face more carefully, taking in the serious gray eyes, the shape of his jaw, the way he held himself with a careful control that spoke of hard-learned lessons. "What did you say your name was?" she asked slowly. "Nathaniel Winters." "What was your name before?" He went very still. "What makes you think it was different? Answer me, please." Nathaniel swallowed hard. "I don't know. I was adopted when I was 3 years old by a family in Denver named Winters. They never told me my birth name. All I know is that I came from a mining town in Utah, and my mother's name was Gabriel." The room spun around her. Gabriel tried to sit up, but her wasted muscles wouldn't cooperate. Hope caught her mother's shoulders, steadying her, looking between Gabriel and the sheriff with wide, confused eyes. "Nathan." Gabriel's voice was barely a whisper. "My Nathan." The color drained from Nathaniel's face. "I've been looking for you for 5 years," he said hoarsely. "Ever since my adoptive parents died and I found papers with your name in this town. I became a sheriff so I could travel, so I could search. When the position here opened up, I thought maybe, but I never imagined. You're my brother." Hope's voice cracked on the word. Gabriel started to cry, tears streaming down her wasted cheeks. "I sold you," she sobbed. "I sold you because I couldn't feed you, because I was pregnant and desperate and afraid. I'm so sorry, Nathan. I'm so sorry. I never stopped thinking about you, not for a single day." Nathaniel moved to the edge of the bed, his hands shaking as he reached out to touch Gabriel's face. "I remember you," he said, his own eyes bright with tears. "Not clearly, but I remember being loved. I remember you singing to me. The Winters were good people, they raised me well, but I always knew there was something missing. Someone I'd lost." Hope sank down onto the floor, her hand pressed to her mouth, watching this reunion with tears streaming down her face. "You came back," Gabriel whispered, threading her fingers through Nathaniel's. "You came back to save me." "I'll always save you," he said fiercely. "I'm going to get you to that sanatorium, and you're going to get better, and we're going to have time. Real time. I'm not losing you again." True to his word, Nathaniel arranged everything. Within 2 days, he'd secured passage on the stage to Colorado Springs and sent word ahead to the sanatorium. Gabriel protested that she couldn't take his money, that it was too much, but Nathaniel was immovable. "You're my mother," he said simply. "This is what sons do." Hope packed their meager belongings while Nathaniel made arrangements for someone to cover his duties as sheriff. The territorial governor owed him a favor, he explained, and would approve a temporary leave. On the morning they were set to depart, Gabriel was too weak to walk to the stage on her own. Nathaniel carried her, his arms strong and steady, holding her as carefully as if she were made of glass. Hope followed with their bags, still overwhelmed by the sudden appearance of a brother she'd never known existed. The journey to Colorado Springs took 4 grueling days. Gabriel drifted in and out of consciousness, her breathing labored, her skin hot with fever. Nathaniel barely left her side, supporting her through coughing fits, holding water to her cracked lips, speaking to her in low, soothing tones. During one of her lucid moments, Gabriel caught his hand. "Tell me about your life," she said. "I want to know everything." So Nathaniel talked. He told her about the Winters family, stern but fair people who'd raised him with discipline and affection. He spoke of his education, his decision to become a lawman, his determination to find justice for people who couldn't fight for themselves. He didn't say it explicitly, but Gabriel understood that everything he'd become was rooted in that early trauma of being separated from his mother. "Did they treat you well?" Gabriel asked, needing to know. "They did," Nathaniel assured her. "I was lucky. They never let me forget I was adopted, but they never made me feel less than their own. When they died of fire 3 years ago, I inherited their property and their savings. That's how I could afford to search for you. I'm sorry you lost them. So am I, but I'm grateful I found you." Hope sat across from them in the cramped stage, watching this exchange with a mixture of jealousy and wonder. Finally, she couldn't contain herself any longer. "Why didn't you ever tell me about him?" she demanded, looking at Gabriel. Gabriel met her daughter's eyes. "Because I was ashamed. Because I thought I'd lost him forever, and talking about it made the pain worse. I was wrong to keep it from you. I'm sorry." Hope's anger melted away. She reached across the space between them and took both Gabriel's and Nathaniel's hands. "We're a family," she said firmly. "All of us. And families stick together." The sanatorium in Colorado Springs was a sprawling white building set against the backdrop of the Rocky Mountains. The air was thin and clean, scented with pine and snow. The staff took one look at Gabriel and whisked her away to a private room with large windows that let in streams of sunlight. Dr. Samuel Harrison, the sanatorium's director, examined Gabriel thoroughly. When he emerged from her room, his expression was grave. "The disease is advanced," he told Nathaniel and Hope. "But she's a fighter. With proper treatment, rest, good nutrition, fresh air, and the new tuberculin therapy, she has a chance. I won't lie to you, though. It will take months, possibly years, and there are no guarantees." "Whatever it takes," Nathaniel said. "Just save her." The first weeks were the hardest. Gabriel's body, weakened by months of inadequate care, struggled to respond to treatment. There were days when the staff didn't think she'd survive until morning. But Nathaniel and Hope kept vigil, taking turns sitting beside her bed, reading to her, talking to her, refusing to let her slip away. Slowly, incrementally, Gabriel began to improve. The coughing fits became less frequent. She could sit up without feeling like she'd run a marathon. Color crept back into her cheeks. By Christmas, she was strong enough to walk to the window and look out at the snow-covered mountains. Nathaniel had taken a job as a deputy marshal in Colorado Springs, work that allowed him to stay close while Gabriel recovered. He rented a small house near the sanatorium where he and Hope lived, creating a home base for their fractured family. Hope enrolled in school for the first time in her life, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. She was hungry for education, for opportunities, for everything she'd been denied growing up in Moab. Nathaniel encouraged her, paying for books and supplies without complaint. In the evenings, the 3 of them would gather in Gabriel's room at the sanatorium. They'd share meals, simple but nourishing food that Gabriel could keep down and talk for hours. Nathaniel would tell stories about his adventures as a lawman, making Hope laugh with his descriptions of inept outlaws and bumbling criminals. Hope would share what she'd learned in school that day, her excitement infectious. And Gabriel would simply listen, her heart so full it ached, grateful beyond words for this second chance. One evening in late January, after Hope had gone home to do her homework, Nathaniel lingered beside Gabriel's bed. There was something different about him tonight, a tension in his shoulders, a restlessness in his movements. "What's troubling you?" Gabriel asked. Nathaniel ran his hand through his hair, a gesture she recognized from his childhood. "I got word from Moab today about the case against the mining company." Gabriel's heart sank. "Bad news?" "No, good news actually. They've agreed to settle. They're offering $5,000. Gabriel gasped. $5,000 was a fortune, more than she could have imagined. "That's wonderful," she said. "You did it, Nathan. You got justice for your father, for our family," he corrected gently. "But that's not what's troubling me." He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "Gabriel, I need to tell you something. The truth is, I didn't come to Moab just to find you. I mean, I did, but that wasn't the only reason." "What do you mean?" Nathaniel pulled his chair closer. 5 years ago, after my parents died, I was angry. Angry at the world, angry at fate, angry at you for giving me away. I told myself I was going to find you and make you answer for what you'd done. I was going to force you to look me in the eye and explain how a mother could sell her own child. Gabriel's throat tightened. "You had every right to be angry." "I did," Nathaniel agreed. "But then I became a lawman and I started to see the world differently. I saw women in situations like yours desperate, alone, out of options. I saw children starving in the streets. I saw how hard life could be, how cruel circumstances could force impossible choices. And slowly, my anger turned to something else. Understanding, maybe, or at least the beginning of it." He took Gabriel's hand. "When I got to Moab and started asking questions, everyone I talked to had the same story. Gabriel Turner, the hardest working woman in town. Gabriel Turner, who never complained, who would give you the shirt off her back if you needed it. Gabriel Turner, who loved her daughter more than life itself. And I realized that you didn't give me away because you didn't love me. You gave me away because you did." Gabriel was crying now, unable to stop. "I thought about you every single day," she whispered. "I told myself you were better off, that you had opportunities I could never give you. But it nearly killed me, Nathan. It nearly killed me." "I know," he said softly. "I see that now, and I need you to know that I forgive you completely, for everything. You made an impossible choice in an impossible situation, and you did it to save my life. That's not something that needs forgiving, but if you need to hear the words, I'm saying them. I forgive you and I love you, and I'm grateful you're my mother." They held each other for a long time, both of them crying, both of them healing. When they finally pulled apart, Gabriel felt lighter than she had in 15 years. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for coming back. Thank you for saving me." Nathaniel smiled, and for the first time since he'd revealed his identity, she saw her little boy in that smile. "We saved each other," he said. By spring, Gabriel was well enough to leave the sanatorium. The doctors were cautiously optimistic about her prognosis. She'd always be susceptible to relapses, they warned, and would need to be careful for the rest of her life. But with proper care, she could hope for many more years. The settlement money from the mining company gave them options. Nathaniel wanted to buy a ranch somewhere quiet where Gabriel could rest and recover fully. Hope wanted to continue her education. Gabriel just wanted them all together. They found a small ranch just outside of Colorado Springs, a pretty piece of land with a creek running through it, and views of Pikes Peak in the distance. The house was modest but well built, with enough bedrooms for everyone and a wide front porch perfect for sitting and watching the sunset. Hope enrolled in a private academy for young women, determined to become a teacher. Nathaniel continued his work as a deputy marshal, building a reputation as a fair and honest lawman. Gabriel focused on regaining her strength, working in the garden, learning to cook on a real stove in a real kitchen, slowly becoming whole again. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. They had money enough not to worry, work enough to stay busy, and each other to lean on when times got hard. It should have been enough. For Gabriel, it was everything she'd ever wanted. But she noticed that Nathaniel, despite his success and the family he'd reclaimed, seemed restless. There was a loneliness in him that their reunion hadn't quite filled. Then, in late summer, everything changed. Gabriel was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching fast. She looked up to see Nathaniel riding hard, his horse lathered with sweat. Her heart jumped into her throat. Something was wrong. Nathaniel reined in and swung down from the saddle before his horse had fully stopped. "Where's Hope?" he asked urgently. "At school. What's happened?" "There's been a bank robbery in town. The outlaws are headed this way. I need you to get inside and lock the doors. Don't come out no matter what you hear." Gabriel's hands clenched in the wet laundry. "Nathaniel, please, Gabriel. I can't do my job if I'm worried about you. Just stay inside and stay safe." He was already swinging back into the saddle, wheeling his horse toward the road. Gabriel watched him disappear in a cloud of dust, her heart pounding with fear. She'd just gotten her son back. She couldn't lose him now. She went inside as instructed, locking the doors and windows. But she couldn't just sit idle. She pulled Thomas's old rifle down from above the fireplace, one of the few possessions she'd managed to keep, and checked that it was loaded. Then she positioned herself by the front window where she could see the road. It wasn't long before she heard more hoofbeats, accompanied by shouting and gunfire. 3 men came racing past the ranch, riding flat out with saddlebags bulging. Behind them, Nathaniel and 2 other deputies gave chase. The outlaws made a fatal mistake. Instead of staying on the road, they turned up the lane toward Gabriel's house, probably hoping to steal fresh horses or take hostages. They skidded to a stop in the yard, their horses blowing hard. Gabriel stepped out onto the porch with the rifle leveled at them. "You boys are on private property," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Turn around and ride out, and we'll say no more about it." The leader of the outlaws, a scarred man with cold eyes, laughed. "What are you going to do, Grandma? Shoot us, if I have to." He reached for his gun. Gabriel didn't hesitate. She squeezed the trigger and the rifle bucked against her shoulder. The bullet kicked up dust at the outlaw's feet, close enough to make his horse shy and nearly unseat him. "Next one goes higher," Gabriel promised. Before the outlaws could respond, Nathaniel and the deputies thundered into the yard. Surrounded and outgunned, the 3 men threw down their weapons and raised their hands in surrender. Nathaniel dismounted and strode over to the porch, his expression caught between fury and admiration. "I told you to stay inside." "You're welcome," Gabriel said dryly, lowering the rifle. Despite his irritation, Nathaniel couldn't quite suppress a smile. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "Your father taught me. He said a woman in mining country needed to know how to defend herself." Gabriel's voice softened. He was right about a lot of things. After the deputies hauled the outlaws away, Nathaniel stayed behind. He and Gabriel sat on the porch steps, watching the sun sink toward the mountains. "You scared me today," Nathaniel said quietly. "You scare me every time you pin on that badge." He nodded, accepting the truth of it. "I've been thinking about what I want out of life," he said. "For so long, everything was about finding you, and then it was about saving you." But now that you're safe and we're together, I'm realizing that's not enough. I want what you had with my father, partnership, love, a family of my own. Gabriel smiled. You'll find it, Nathan. You're a good man. Any woman would be lucky to have you. That's what Hope keeps saying. She's been trying to set me up with every eligible woman in Colorado Springs. He shook his head ruefully. But none of them feel right. They're all perfectly nice, but there's no spark, no connection. It'll happen when you least expect it, Gabriel assured him. That's how it was with your father and me. I literally ran into him on the street in Moab, dropped a basket of eggs all over both of us. We were both so annoyed, covered in yolk and shell, and then we looked at each other and just started laughing. I knew right then that he was different. Nathaniel listened to this story with a soft expression. Tell me more about him, he said. I want to know everything. So Gabriel talked about Thomas, his laugh, his principles, his gentle hands and fierce determination to make life better for the workers. She painted a picture of the man Nathaniel's father had been, giving her son a gift she should have been able to give years ago. When Hope came home from school, she found them still sitting there, talking and laughing, looking more like mother and son than they ever had before. The following week, Nathaniel was called to help with a situation in a small town called Fairplay, about 60 miles west. A dispute over mining claims had turned violent, and the territorial marshal needed experienced deputies to restore order. Nathaniel agreed to go, promising to be back within 2 weeks. Gabriel tried not to worry, but she couldn't help it. Nathaniel was capable and careful, but he was still her son. She'd spent 15 years not knowing if he was alive or dead. The thought of losing him again made her physically ill. Hope noticed her mother's anxiety and tried to distract her with plans for the ranch. They spent long hours discussing what crops to plant, whether to get chickens or maybe a milk cow, how to improve the house. It helped, but Gabriel still found herself checking the road constantly, hoping to see Nathaniel riding home. He returned on a Thursday afternoon, 3 days later than expected. Gabriel was in the kitchen making bread when she heard his horse. She ran outside, not caring that she was covered in flour, relief flooding through her at the sight of him whole and unhurt. But Nathaniel wasn't alone. He had someone with him, a young woman who sat behind him on his horse, her arms wrapped around his waist, her head resting against his back. She was clearly exhausted and possibly injured, her clothes torn and dirty. Nathaniel dismounted and carefully helped the woman down. "This is Grace Thompson," he said. "She needs help." Hope had emerged from the barn, and together the three of them got Grace into the house and settled on the sofa. Gabriel examined her quickly. No serious injuries, but she was dehydrated and exhausted, with bruises on her wrists and a nasty cut on her forehead. "I'll get water and bandages," Hope said, hurrying off. Gabriel cleaned the cut on Grace's forehead while Nathaniel explained. She was held hostage by the miners. They grabbed her when the marshal's office wouldn't negotiate with them. I got her out 2 nights ago, but we couldn't travel straight back. Had to take the long way around to avoid patrols from both sides. Grace opened her eyes, which were a striking hazel green, and looked at Nathaniel with unmistakable gratitude. "He saved my life," she said, her voice hoarse. "They were going to kill me to make a point. Nathan got me out right before." She shuddered and couldn't finish. "You're safe now," Gabriel said gently, recognizing something in this young woman that called to her. Grace had the look of someone who'd been through hell and come out the other side still fighting. Over the next few days, as Grace recovered her strength, her story emerged in pieces. She was 22 years old, originally from Kansas. She'd come west 2 years ago to teach at a small school in Fairplay, seeking adventure and independence. She'd been staying at the boarding house when the miners seized the town, and she'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. I don't have anywhere to go, Grace admitted on her third day at the ranch. The school board terminated my position when the trouble started. They said it wasn't safe for a woman teacher. I have a little money saved, but not enough to get back to Kansas. And even if I could, I don't want to go back. My father, she stopped, pressing her lips together. Let's just say I didn't leave Kansas on good terms with my family. Gabriel and Hope exchanged glances. Gabriel could read her daughter's mind. Here was another soul in need of saving, another piece of their growing, unconventional family. Stay here, Gabriel said. At least until you figure out what you want to do next. We have the room, and honestly, we could use the help. Hope's busy with school, Nathan's busy with his work, and I'm still not supposed to overexert myself. Having an extra pair of hands around would be a blessing. Grace's eyes filled with tears. I can't impose, it's not an imposition, Gabriel said firmly. It's an invitation. Stay. So Grace stayed. She proved to be a hard worker and pleasant company, throwing herself into ranch chores with determination. She helped Gabriel with cooking and cleaning, worked alongside Hope in the garden, and generally made herself useful without being asked. Gabriel noticed that Nathaniel found excuses to be home more often than usual. He'd never been one to linger over breakfast, but suddenly he was taking his time with his coffee, asking Grace questions about her teaching experience, her favorite books, her thoughts on everything from politics to poetry. Grace, for her part, seemed equally drawn to Nathaniel. She'd light up when he entered a room, her eyes following him even when she was supposed to be focused on something else. They'd fall into long conversations about nothing and everything, their voices carrying through the house long after everyone else had gone to bed. Hope teased her brother mercilessly about it. "You're staring," she'd whisper when Grace's back was turned. "I'm not staring," Nathaniel would protest. "I'm just making sure she's comfortable." "Sure you are." Gabriel watched all of this with a mixture of amusement and hope. She'd seen the loneliness in her son, the searching. Grace seemed to fill something in him that had been empty. And Grace, who'd run from a difficult family situation into an uncertain future, seemed to find peace and safety in their home and specifically in Nathaniel's presence. About 6 weeks after Grace's arrival, Gabriel found her standing at the fence behind the house, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. There was something melancholy in her expression. "What's troubling you?" Gabriel asked, coming to stand beside her. Grace was quiet for a moment. "I need to figure out what I'm going to do with my life," she said finally. "I can't stay here forever, living on your charity." "Why not?" "Because it's not right. You've all been so kind, but I need to make my own way." Gabriel studied the younger woman's profile. "Can I tell you a story?" she asked. Grace nodded. So Gabriel told her about Thomas, about his death and the impossible choice she'd faced. She told Grace about selling Nathan, about the 15 years of guilt and grief. She told her about getting sick, about being days from death, about the miracle of Nathan finding her. "The point is," Gabriel said when she'd finished, "sometimes we can't make it on our own. Sometimes we need help, and there's no shame in that. You're not living on charity. You're part of our family now if you want to be, and families take care of each other." Grace was crying, tears streaming down her face. "I don't deserve your kindness. None of us deserve the blessings we get. We just need to be grateful for them and try to do better going forward." Gabriel put her arm around Grace's shoulders. "So stop torturing yourself about what you should do and start thinking about what you want to do. What makes you happy?" Grace's eyes drifted toward the house, where Nathaniel was visible through the window, reading by lamplight. "I want to stay," she whispered. "Is that selfish?" "Not if you have a good reason." "I think I'm falling in love with your son," Gabriel smiled. "Well, that's about the best reason I can think of." She gave Grace a gentle push. Go talk to him. Tell him how you feel. Life's too short for regrets and what-ifs. Believe me, I know." Grace hesitated, then squared her shoulders and walked toward the house with purpose. Gabriel stayed by the fence, watching the last of the sunset fade, sending up a silent prayer for both of them. Inside, Nathaniel looked up in surprise when Grace entered. He'd been expecting Hope, who usually joined him for evening reading. Instead, Grace crossed the room and sat down beside him on the sofa, close enough that their knees almost touched. "Can we talk?" Grace asked. "Of course." Nathaniel set his book aside, giving her his full attention. Grace took a breath, gathering her courage. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me get through it before you say anything." "Can you do that?" Nathaniel nodded, his expression intent. "When you pulled me out of that building in Fairplay, I was convinced I was going to die. I'd made my peace with it. I was actually relieved because it meant I wouldn't have to keep fighting, keep struggling to survive in a world that didn't want me. My father had made it clear I was a disappointment. I had no family who cared if I lived or died. Teaching was the one thing I was good at, and they'd taken that from me, so I was ready to let go." She met his eyes, her own bright with unshed tears. "And then you came. You risked your life to get me out, and you treated me like I mattered, like I was worth saving. And then you brought me here to your family, and they welcomed me without question. For the first time in my life, I felt like maybe I belonged somewhere." Nathaniel started to speak, but Grace held up her hand. "I'm not finished. The thing is, it's not just gratitude I feel. At first, I thought I was just confused, mistaking relief for something deeper. But it's been weeks now, and every day I'm more certain. I'm falling in love with you, Nathan. Maybe I've already fallen. And I know that's probably not what you want to hear, and I know I have nothing to offer you. I have no money, no prospects, no family worth mentioning. But I needed to be honest because I can't keep pretending I don't feel this way." She stood up quickly, ready to flee, but Nathaniel caught her hand. "Grace, wait." His voice was rough. "You're wrong about one thing." "What?" "You're wrong about it not being what I want to hear. I've been half in love with you since I pulled you out of that window in Fairplay. You were terrified and hurt, but you still looked me in the eye and thanked me like you were a queen granting a favor instead of a hostage being rescued. You had grit and grace, no pun intended, and I couldn't stop thinking about you the entire ride back here." He stood up, still holding her hand, closing the distance between them. "And then you came here and fit into our lives like you'd always been part of them. You make my mother laugh. You challenge Hope to think bigger. And you make me want to come home at the end of every day just so I can see your face. So no, Grace. You're not alone in this." Grace's breath caught. "You mean it." "I mean it. I love you. I think I've loved you from the moment I saw you, and every day since has just made me more certain." They stood there for a heartbeat, and then Grace rose up on her toes and kissed him. Nathaniel wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, and for both of them it felt like coming home. Gabriel, watching through the window, smiled and turned away to give them privacy. Hope joined her a moment later, and they stood together in the gathering darkness. "You think they'll be happy?" Hope asked. "I think they'll work at it every day and make themselves happy," Gabriel said. "That's what love is, not a fairy tale, but a choice you make over and over again." Nathaniel and Grace were married in October, a simple ceremony in Colorado Springs with Gabriel, Hope, and a few friends in attendance. Grace wore a dress of blue silk that Gabriel had sewn for her, and Nathaniel wore his best suit. When they exchanged vows, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. They made their home at the ranch, building a small cabin just down the hill from the main house, close enough for family, far enough for privacy. Grace took a position teaching at a school in Colorado Springs, riding into town 3 days a week. Nathaniel continued his work as a deputy marshal, though he turned down assignments that would take him far from home for long periods. Life settled into a new pattern. Gabriel continued to regain her strength, growing healthier and stronger with each passing month. Hope graduated from the academy and began teaching alongside Grace. The two women became close friends as well as sisters by marriage, their easy companionship a source of joy for Gabriel. On a crisp November evening, the whole family gathered for dinner at the main house. It was Gabriel's 39th birthday, though she tried to downplay the occasion. Grace and Hope had conspired against her, however, creating a feast and inviting neighbors to celebrate. After the meal, as everyone sat around the table talking and laughing, Grace cleared her throat. "Nathan and I have something to tell you all," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. Nathaniel took her hand, grinning. "We're going to have a baby. Grace is expecting in the spring." The table erupted in congratulations. Gabriel felt her eyes fill with tears, happy ones this time. A grandchild. She was going to have a grandchild. After everything they'd been through, after all the pain and loss and separation, their family was growing. Hope jumped up and hugged Grace, then punched Nathaniel in the shoulder affectionately. "About time," she teased. "I was beginning to think you two were waiting for something." That night, after everyone had gone home, Gabrielle stood on her porch looking up at the stars. She thought about the long, hard road that had brought her to this moment, the choices she'd made, both good and bad, the price she'd paid and the grace she'd been given. She thought about Nathan, her little boy who'd become this strong, capable man, who'd searched for her when he had every right to hate her, who'd saved her life and given her back her future. She thought about Hope, fierce and bright and full of potential, about Grace, who'd become the daughter-in-law Gabriel hadn't known she needed, about the grandchild growing beneath Grace's heart, a new beginning for all of them. She thought about Thomas too, and wondered if he could see them from wherever he was. She hoped he was proud, hoped he knew that his death hadn't been meaningless, that justice had finally come even if it had taken 15 years. Hoped he understood why she'd made the choices she had and forgave her for the cost. "Thank you," she whispered to the night sky, to God or fate or whatever force had brought her son back to her. "Thank you for giving me another chance." The winter passed peacefully. Nathaniel and Grace prepared for their baby, turning the second bedroom in their cabin into a nursery. Hope threw herself into her teaching with passionate dedication. Gabrielle spent her days tending the house and garden, her health continuing to improve. In March, Grace went into labor. It was a long, difficult birth that stretched through the night and into the next day. Nathaniel paced the floor of the main house while Hope tried to distract him with card games and conversation. Gabrielle stayed with Grace, coaching her through contractions, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, encouraging her when she wanted to give up. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, a baby's cry rang through the cabin. Nathaniel burst through the door to find his wife exhausted but beaming, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. "It's a boy," Grace said softly. "A healthy, perfect boy." Nathaniel sat on the edge of the bed, his hands shaking as he reached for his son. The baby had a shock of dark hair and serious gray eyes that looked around with solemn curiosity. "What should we name him?" Grace asked. Nathaniel looked at Gabrielle, who stood in the doorway with tears streaming down her face. "Thomas," he said. "Thomas Gabriel Winters." "If that's all right with you, Gabrielle." Gabrielle could only nod, too overcome to speak. To have her grandson named after his grandfather and herself felt like a gift beyond measure, a redemption she didn't deserve but accepted with a grateful heart. Little Thomas was an easy baby, quick to smile and slow to fuss. He thrived under the attention of his extended family, passed from hand to hand, loved by everyone who held him. Gabriel spent hours with him, singing the same lullabies she'd sung to Nathan and Hope, telling him stories, watching him grow and change with wonder. When Thomas was 6 months old, Hope came home with news. She'd met someone, a young doctor who'd recently moved to Colorado Springs from Philadelphia. His name was Marcus Shaw, and he was everything Hope had never thought she wanted: educated, refined, gentle, and completely devoted to her. Gabriel met Marcus and approved immediately. He treated Hope with respect and genuine affection, listened when she talked, and challenged her to think differently about the world. Within 3 months, he'd proposed. Hope said yes without hesitation. They married in September, another simple ceremony but no less joyful for it. Hope moved into town with Marcus, into a neat house near his practice. She continued teaching, and they talked about starting their own family someday. The ranch felt quieter with Hope gone, but Gabriel didn't mind. She had Nathaniel and Grace nearby, little Thomas to dote on, and the deep satisfaction of seeing her children happy and settled. It was more than enough. On a warm evening in October, as Gabriel sat on her porch watching the sunset, Nathaniel came to sit beside her. Thomas was asleep in his arms, a warm, sweet-smelling bundle. "I've been thinking," Nathaniel said quietly, "about everything that happened, about the choices you had to make." Gabriel tensed. They'd talked about this before, but she still carried guilt like a stone in her chest. "I understand now," Nathaniel continued, "why you did what you did. And I want you to know that I don't just forgive you, I'm grateful. Because if you hadn't given me to the Winters, I wouldn't have had the education and opportunities that made me who I am. I wouldn't have become a lawman. I wouldn't have been in the right place to find you again, or to help Grace. Everything good in my life traces back to that terrible decision you had to make." He shifted Thomas carefully, then reached out and took Gabriel's hand. "You saved me twice. Once when you gave me away, and once when you let me save you. And now I have this incredible life, a wife I love, a son who's perfect, a sister who's brilliant, and a mother who's the strongest person I know. I wouldn't change a single thing." Gabriel's tears fell freely. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "The man you've become, the father you are. I'm so proud I could burst." They sat together in comfortable silence, 3 generations linked by blood and love and the choices that had nearly torn them apart but ultimately brought them together. The years rolled on, each one bringing new joys and small challenges. Hope and Marcus had twin daughters, bright and curious girls who kept everyone on their toes. Grace and Nathaniel had a second child, a daughter they named Caroline, who had her mother's hazel eyes and her father's serious demeanor. Gabriel watched her family grow with profound gratitude. She watched Thomas learn to walk and talk, watched him develop the same serious thoughtfulness his father had. She watched Hope's twins grow into bold, adventurous girls who asked a million questions. She watched Caroline learn to charm everyone around her with her infectious laughter. On her 45th birthday, Gabriel sat at a table groaning with food, surrounded by her family. Nathaniel and Grace, Hope and Marcus, 4 grandchildren running around causing chaos, neighbors and friends who'd become like family. The ranch had become a gathering place, a home in the truest sense of the word. After dinner, as the sun set over the mountains painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Gabriel found herself alone on the porch with Grace. The younger woman had become like a daughter to her, and Gabriel cherished their quiet moments together. "I want to thank you," Grace said suddenly. Gabriel looked at her in surprise. "For what?" "For showing me what real family looks like. For teaching me that love isn't about blood, it's about choice and commitment and showing up even when it's hard. You chose to love Nathan even when it meant letting him go. You chose to love Hope even when you were drowning in grief. You chose to love me when I was a stranger who needed help. You taught me how to be the kind of mother I want to be. Gabriel squeezed Grace's hand. You didn't need me to teach you that. You already knew how to love. You just needed people worthy of it. We're all worthy, Grace said softly. That's what you taught me. We're all worthy of love and second chances and grace. Inside the house, someone started playing the piano, Hope, by the sound of it. The children's voices rose in a slightly off-key song. Nathaniel appeared in the doorway, Thomas and Caroline clinging to his legs, and smiled at his mother and wife. Come inside, he called. The kids want you to dance with them. Gabriel let Grace pull her to her feet and lead her inside to where her family waited. As she danced with little Thomas, spinning him around while he giggled with delight, Gabriel felt a peace so profound it took her breath away. This was what she'd been fighting for all those years ago when she'd made that terrible choice. This moment, this love, this family. It had taken nearly 2 decades and a journey through the darkest valleys of despair, but they'd made it. They were together. They were whole. And as Nathaniel caught her eye across the room and smiled that same sweet smile he'd had as a 3-year-old boy, Gabriel smiled back, letting him see all the love and pride and gratitude in her heart. She'd been given a second chance at everything she thought she'd lost. And she was determined not to waste a single moment of it. 5 more years passed in the blink of an eye. Thomas grew into a thoughtful boy of 7, already showing signs of his father's strong sense of justice. Caroline was 5, all sunshine and sass. Hope's twins were 6, keeping their parents perpetually busy. The ranch prospered under Nathaniel's management. He'd left the marshal's service to focus on ranching and family, though he still helped out when serious trouble arose. Gabriel, now 50 years old, was healthier than she'd been in decades. The consumption that had nearly killed her was a distant memory, kept at bay by clean living and good care. Her hair was more silver than brown now, and lines creased her face, but her eyes were bright and her step was light. One spring morning, she was working in her garden when a rider approached. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun. As the rider drew closer, she recognized Marcus, Hope's husband. But something was wrong. He was alone and riding hard. Gabriel's heart clenched with fear. She hurried to meet him, already knowing something terrible had happened. Marcus swung down from his horse, his face pale. "It's Hope," he said without preamble. "She's sick, very sick. Some kind of fever that came on suddenly. I've tried everything I know, but she's getting worse. I need," his voice broke. "I need help." Gabriel didn't hesitate. "Nathaniel," she called, her voice sharp with urgency. Within minutes, they'd hitched up the wagon. Grace stayed behind with the children while Gabriel and Nathaniel raced to town with Marcus. The drive felt endless, every minute stretching into hours. They found Hope in her bedroom, burning with fever, barely conscious. Gabriel took one look at her daughter's flushed face and trembling limbs and felt terror grip her heart. She'd lost so much already. She couldn't lose Hope too. For 3 days, Gabriel and Nathaniel took turns sitting with Hope, bathing her with cool water, forcing liquids between her cracked lips, talking to her even when she couldn't respond. Marcus worked frantically, consulting medical texts, trying every treatment he knew. On the 3rd night, Hope's fever broke. She opened her eyes, weak but lucid, and found Gabriel sitting beside her bed. "Mama," she whispered. Gabriel burst into tears, clutching Hope's hand. "You scared me half to death." "Sorry," Hope said with a ghost of her usual smile. "Didn't mean to." Hope's recovery was slow but steady. Whatever illness had struck her down released its grip, leaving her exhausted but alive. The experience shook all of them, a sharp reminder of how fragile life could be. It also brought the family even closer together. They'd faced the possibility of loss and come through on the other side. It made them more intentional about their time together, more grateful for ordinary moments. That summer, they celebrated the 4th of July with a huge gathering at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from miles around. There was food and music and laughter. The children ran wild, chasing fireflies as darkness fell, their shrieks of joy echoing across the valley. As Gabriel watched her family, all of them healthy and happy and together, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. She thought back to that desperate woman in Moab who'd sold her son to save his life. If she could go back and tell that woman what the future held, would it have made the decision easier? Or would knowing about the long road ahead have made it even harder? She didn't know. She only knew that she wouldn't change anything if it meant losing this moment, this family, this love. Nathaniel found her standing alone, looking out at the celebration. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How lucky I am," Gabriel said simply. "How very, very lucky." Nathaniel put his arm around her shoulders. "We're the lucky ones," he said. "You gave us all this. This family, this home, this life. You're the foundation everything else is built on." Grace joined them, Caroline on her hip. Hope and Marcus walked over, the twins running ahead of them. They stood together watching the fireworks someone had set off in the distance, brilliant bursts of color against the dark sky. "I love you all so much," Gabriel said, her voice thick with emotion. "We love you too, Mama," Hope said, leaning her head on Gabriel's shoulder. "More than all the stars in the sky," Nathaniel added, echoing the words Gabriel had said to him so many years ago. The fireworks continued, painting the night with light and color. Gabriel stood surrounded by her family, wrapped in love and gratitude, and knew without a doubt that every choice she'd made, every sacrifice, every moment of pain had been worth it to arrive at this perfect moment. The years continued to unfold, each one bringing its own mixture of joy and challenge. Thomas announced he wanted to become a lawyer, dedicated to helping people who couldn't help themselves. Caroline declared she'd be a teacher like her aunt. Hope's twins developed their own distinct personalities, one quiet and artistic, the other bold and adventurous. Nathaniel and Grace talked about having another child. And when Grace announced she was pregnant again at 40, the whole family celebrated. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and she delivered a healthy boy they named Daniel. Gabriel held her newest grandson and marveled at the blessing of it all. Marcus's medical practice thrived, and he gained a reputation as one of the finest doctors in Colorado. Hope continued teaching but also began writing stories and essays about life in the West, about family and resilience and second chances. Her work was published in Eastern magazines, and she found success she'd never imagined. The ranch prospered. Nathaniel proved to be an excellent businessman as well as a skilled rancher. They expanded their holdings, hired hands to help with the work, and became one of the more successful operations in the area. But success didn't change them. They remained generous and welcoming, always ready to help a neighbor in need. Gabriel watched it all with deep satisfaction. She'd lived long enough to see her children settled and happy, her grandchildren thriving. She'd been given more years than the doctors had predicted, more joy than she'd ever thought possible. On her 55th birthday, the family threw a massive celebration. 3 generations gathered to honor the woman who'd held them all together through sheer force of will and stubborn love. There were speeches and toasts, laughter and tears. Gabriel felt like a queen holding court, surrounded by her subjects. Late that night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Gabriel sat on her porch one more time. The stars were brilliant overhead, and a warm breeze carried the scent of sage and pine. She thought about Thomas, her first husband, and wondered if he could see what their son had become. She thought about the Winters family who'd raised Nathan with love and care. She thought about the long road from Moab to Colorado Springs, from desperation to abundance, from separation to reunion. She thought about fate and choice, about how sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead to the best, about how loss and love are often tangled together, inseparable. The door opened behind her and Nathaniel stepped out. "You should be resting," he said gently. "It's been a long day." "I'm not tired," Gabriel said. "I'm too happy to sleep." Nathaniel sat beside her and they looked out at the land they'd built a life on together. "Do you have any regrets?" he asked. Gabriel considered the question carefully. "I regret the pain," she said finally. "I regret that we lost so many years together, but I don't regret the choices I made because they led us here. And here is exactly where I want to be." "Good," Nathaniel said, taking her hand. "Because we're not going anywhere. You're stuck with us." Gabriel laughed, squeezing his fingers. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be." They sat together in comfortable silence, mother and son, bound by blood and choice and love that had survived impossible odds. Around them, the ranch slept peacefully. Inside the houses scattered across the property, Gabriel's family dreamed their own dreams. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and joys as every day did. But tonight, in this moment, everything was perfect. Gabriel had been given a second chance at life, at motherhood, at happiness. She'd been given the gift of watching her son grow from a traumatized 3-year-old into a strong, honorable man. She'd been given daughters and grandchildren and a love that spanned generations. She'd been given everything she'd sacrificed and more. As the stars wheeled overhead and the night wrapped around them like a blanket, Gabriel closed her eyes and breathed deeply, committing this feeling to memory. This peace, this contentment, this profound sense of being exactly where she belonged. She'd come so far from that desperate widow in Moab. She'd survived poverty and illness, guilt and grief. She'd made impossible choices and paid terrible prices. But she'd also experienced grace and redemption, reunion and renewal. And in the end, love had won. Love had brought her son back to her. Love had given them all a second chance. Love had built this family from broken pieces and created something beautiful. Gabriel opened her eyes and looked at Nathaniel, at the man her little boy had become, and smiled. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what? For finding me, for saving me, for giving me this life." Nathaniel leaned over and kissed her forehead. "You saved yourself, Gabriel. You fought and survived and never gave up. All I did was help you along the way." "You did more than that," Gabriel insisted. "You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me a reason to live. You gave me everything." "Then we're even," Nathaniel said with a smile, "because you gave me life. Twice." They stayed on the porch until the moon rose high, talking and laughing, sharing memories and dreams. When they finally went inside, Gabriel felt a bone-deep satisfaction that came from knowing her life had mattered. That despite all the mistakes and missteps, she'd done something right. She'd loved fiercely and without reservation. She'd fought for her family with everything she had. She'd survived when survival seemed impossible. And she'd built something lasting, a legacy of love that would continue long after she was gone. As Gabriel fell asleep that night, surrounded by the sounds of her family, she whispered one more prayer of gratitude to whatever force had brought her to this moment. And then she surrendered to sleep with a smile on her face and peace in her heart. The story that had begun with a gunshot and a terrible choice had ended with love and laughter, and a family bound together by something stronger than blood. It had ended with redemption and second chances, and the knowledge that sometimes, even when we make the hardest choices, fate has a way of bringing us home. Gabriel Turner had sold her son to save his life. And years later, that son had returned to save hers. In saving each other, they'd created something neither could have built alone, a family rooted in sacrifice and watered with grace, growing strong and tall under the vast western sky. And they lived happily, surrounded by love, for all the rest of their days.